Welcome to the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharpe. Here's our headlines. Okay, who am I kidding? There's one and only one headline this week, tariffs. Because President Donald Trump signed an aggressive and far-reaching set of what he called reciprocal tariffs, a plan that sets a 10% baseline tariff across the board and imposes some pretty steep tariffs on many countries, including a 34% tariff on Chinese imports, which, when you add in the previous tariffs, brings it to about 54% on China, and a 20% tariff on goods coming into the U.S. from the European Union. Economists questioning how the White House calculated their tariff rates that it claims other countries are charging on goods imported from the U.S. in order to arrive at what they consider to be reciprocal tariff rates. All I know is that I want to import some money into my 401k after we saw the stock's reaction to these tariffs. But let's talk about how these tariffs will affect Arizona specifically, and let's do that with my guest this week on the AZ Political Podcast, Danny Seiden.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Yeah, you bet. Now, so for those who don't know, Danny's the president, the CEO of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Prior to heading up the Arizona Chamber, Danny served as general counsel for the Phoenix-based tech firm Global Market Innovators. He directed government and public affairs for Intel's Arizona operations, and he served in government as Governor Ducey's deputy chief of staff. Danny is an attorney, boo, who received his degree, yay, at the ASU Sandra Day's O'Connor College of Law after getting his poli-sci degree at Pepperdine.
Correct. That's right.
Okay. So, by the way, I'm jealous. I attempted to get my poli-sci degree at NAU, which is almost as pretty a campus, but Pepperdine, oh my
For
God.
Arizona, NAU's the Pepperdine of Arizona, we'll call it that. It's very pretty up there, yeah.
All right. So according to the Arizona Commerce Authority, Arizona's international trade reached record levels last year. From Arizona, we exported $9 billion in goods to Mexico, $2.8 billion to Canada, about $2 billion to the Netherlands. Meanwhile, we imported into our state $11.6 billion from Mexico, $5.4 billion from China, $3.6 billion from Taiwan. What is the Arizona Chamber's official position on these tariffs?
Our official position is what it's been for, I would say, almost a century now, and that's that tariffs are a bad idea. You know, tariffs are, in effect, Jim, a tax. You know, when people are talking about tariffs right now, you're going to hear a tariff on these countries, a tariff on Taiwan, a tariff on Israel. No. The tariffs are paid by us. It's paid by my members when we import goods into this country. It's then transferred down to the consumer. And so that's very concerning to us to see, again, trying to grasp a little bit of the confusing policy coming out of D.C. right now and what the rationale for each of these tariffs are, what it means to our supply chains. Because supply chains aren't decided overnight. I mean, our companies who do billions of dollars in business plan decades in advance on how they're going to, move their goods into our country, how they're going to distribute, what the price points are. And to have that change, overnight, and I would say multiple times within 2 months, it's very chaotic right now in terms of the market. And chaos is not good. And you're seeing that in your 401ks today. You're seeing that
Which is a 201k right now.
Yeah. You're seeing that with people retracting. Now, I will say, I'm going to try and be as fair as possible. A lot of this is unprecedented. So we don't know exactly where this ends.
Right.
Is there light at the end of the tunnel when you couple what President Trump's doing with tariffs with his desire to make his tax cuts permanent? And that in those tax cuts, you see a permanent decrease in the corporate income tax, which will result in investment. Capital goes where it's most wanted, stays where it's most welcome, we like to say. So we'll have to wait and see if that, plus what he's doing with EPA regulations and permitting reform, will really help spur growth there. But this is a monumental shift in economic policy. And so, yeah, we're a little bit confused by people rushing to try and defend it based on these trade deficit numbers are being pointed out. But if you've been around a while, trade deficits aren't necessarily bad. It might sound bad to say, well, there's this huge percentage of, tariffs on American goods, and that's created a trade deficit. That's just not true. What a trade deficit simply is means we buy more from one country than they buy from us because America likes cheap goods and the dollar is strong. This is going to make all goods more expensive, and that weakens the dollar, weakens our purchasing power.
Well, let's talk specifically about Arizona's two largest trading partners, which is the reverse of what it is for America on the whole, which is Canada followed by Mexico. For Arizona, it's Mexico followed by Canada. Right. Those are our two largest trading
Mexico
partners.
times 4, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So they were kind of spared from this latest round of tariffs.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're the tariffs that they were already hit with, 25% tariffs on, imported autos. You've got The steel and aluminum tariffs. So anything coming in from Mexico or Canada, as far as that goes, is subject to a tariff. But they didn't get hit with these reciprocal tariffs. Do you think that might be President Trump listening a little bit to the grumbling of some members of his own party who voted in the Senate? I think it was 4 Republicans voted with the Democrats to denounce the tariffs.
Well, I think what really spared Mexico and Canada in this round, if you want to say that, is he exempted things that were covered under the USMCA, which was the trade deal he negotiated in his first term, which was so much better than NAFTA, and U.S. was winning off of that trade deal. So going back a month, going back 2 months, when he's talked about in the past, he's called that deal bad. He said we need to renegotiate it. And that's been upsetting, again, Jim, because I could name companies who've come to Arizona and built their whole economic model on locating here around the USMCA deal and how that would work for their supply chain. And so to finally see that protected and respected, that makes me feel a little bit better. It means we honor our word. We're not going to double cross our trading partners. If you want to deglobalize, if you want to move away from a global supply chain, and that's certainly what you're seeing right now, you have to maintain dominance in your hemisphere. So we need good relationships with Mexico and Canada. As we cut ourselves off, as we get in bigger fights with Southeast Asia, we need to have solutions for that.
And I think there was a Mexican economist who, is kind of an expert on tariffs, said he was encouraged by a little bit of this because he said it's almost like Trump is trying to build a North American fortress, if you will.
I would argue, Jim, that was the strategy in his first term. That was what USMCA was. You're moving away from the multilateral large trade agreements and getting into more of these bilaterals, country to country. And again, controlling our hemisphere is key to our sovereignty. It's always been key to our prosperity. It's key to how we've avoided wars in the past. If we're here and we have everything we need here, that's a good place to be. I think during COVID, we saw that wasn't the case, that our supply chains were so globally dependent. We had a lot of work to do on that. And I think we get there by working with Canada and working with Mexico. And I do want to point out, could things be better? Sure. There's elements of USMCA that could be better for the U.S., but I always pay attention to who's asking for it. You hear the dairy farmer, example a lot that, Canada has a tariff on dairy, in America of like 200, 250%. That's so much better than it was before under NAFTA. I mean, USMCA opened up dairy channels for our farmers into Canada. And again, it's all seasonal. I mean, we sell our winter lettuce. They sell things at different seasons. It's a very complex agreement that all has really benefited our economy.
So let's talk about the possible winners and possible losers in all of this. Can you tell me what parts of the Arizona economy, what sectors of the Arizona economy are going to suffer the most under these tariffs as head of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry? And are there any winners for Arizona? Again,
I think the winning, and even President Trump is saying this is going to have to be long-term. You got to take a long-term approach. He said everyone's going to feel short-term pain. That's just going to happen. But I mean, there's a lot of Trump voters, Jim, who are looking at their 401ks who wanted to retire, in a year, like, what am I going to do? When is this going to come back? When's this wealth going to come back? So I will say the biggest loser that I'll go right to is the consumer. Because at the end, we're at the end of the cycle. We're going to pay for these tariffs. We're going to pay the increase in goods. And there's going to be folks, if the long-term plan doesn't work, we're going to say right now, yesterday, Liberation Day, might go down in history as one of the largest tax increases on American consumers in history. Now, so I think President Trump has to deliver on everything else to make it successful. So again, the consumers, and I'll get into why. If you look at the big box retailers, a lot of their goods come from where? They come from Southeast Asia. So if we throw another 25% on what's already been going on over there, and there's reciprocal tariffs, there is no margin that is large enough for places like Walmart and Target to not have to pass that cost down to consumers. They can't run at a loss. So you're going to see increased prices the second you go into, Walmart, Target. And those, by the way, are the stores people go to, especially when the economy is tight. They love going to Walmart to get cheaper prices. But if Walmart can't lower its prices because of these tariffs, that's a real issue for our economy. So one, consumers. Two, car manufacturers. Now, even with the exemptions they're trying to put in under USMCA and others, when you make a car, and we make great electric cars here in Arizona, Lucid's one of the finest automobiles out there, those part components come from all over the world. I mean, we used to have these maps up because we helped on USMCA. One piece that goes into a Ford, it goes to 8 different countries. And so think about how that tariff builds and builds upon each other. So I don't even know what domestically manufactured means anymore. BMW, not an American company, manufactures their SUVs in South Carolina, but the parts for that come from all over the world. So again, if you're wanting to buy a car, you might be a loser on that. And I'll say this, I think President Trump sees that too, and that's why you're seeing this new idea, right, where you can get your income tax, you can take what you pay in interest for a new American-made car and deduct it from your federal income tax. That's one of his proposals, because I think they realize we have to find some way to get people to buy American. But that's just free money going into the system. And I thought our party understood that doesn't work. That doesn't lower prices. Infusing a system with free government cash never brings prices down. That pushes more towards inflation. So we're watching all this closely, but there's a lot. And so who wins? People who have complex networks who can figure out where they can get their goods. Now, I know members of mine who operate in the EU, who operate in America, who operate all over the country. They are right now calculating, where can I get my goods? Where can I avoid tariffs? And the people who have those complex networks, they'll save a little bit and they might even thrive. But overall, everybody loses in tariff. And I just want to add one more way because I haven't heard this discussed. These tariffs seem to suggest we need protectionism for American manufacturing and making things here to thrive. Now, what I worry about is people becoming dependent on that because, we believe in competition, Jim. We believe we're going to innovate and we're going to make things better and we're going to make things, in such a way that the consumer will want to buy them and that maybe we can bring prices down. If we have tariffs, that kind of culls innovation a little bit because they're operating under that protection. They're almost being forced to buy, things that are made here. And that's never how we've done things. We believe in innovation. We believe in trying to make what's better and what's next. And so I worry that tariffs kind of squash that.
Yeah, let's take a look at, and I wonder about this. I was wondering about the same thing myself, which is, what parts that go into manufacturing something in the United States that come in from outside of the country, how much is that going to play a part in rising costs? Or can they figure out some kind of an exemption? If you're bringing this stuff in so that it's put together here in America, how does that work? But I wanted to talk about one specific company that you've talked about many times on Arizona's Morning News with me, many times, which happens to be the largest foreign investment in U.S. history, not just Arizona history, but Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing coming here and building not one, but two plants. How does this affect them?
Up to planned 6 fabs now.
Well,
so,
right.
Yeah.
So how does that affect them? Are they importing enough stuff that that they're just going to say, you know what, let's just go back to Taiwan?
Well, they are committed to Arizona. Let me start by saying you're right. TSMC, $165 billion commitment to Arizona to build, multiple fabs, packaging facilities and an R&D facility. That is really establishing us as their U.S. headquarters. Mm-hmm. And that's huge because, as you've heard, not just me say, that company is the most important company in the world right now. Their chips are in all this technology we're sitting right here. Their chips are in all of our defense. And to have them here and to have them be successful is really important. So no, I don't think TSMC will leave. I think these tariffs do hurt. And here's why. People will say, well, didn't the tariffs spur them to make that investment? I would argue, no, they did not. What spurred them to make that investment is our regulatory environment, is the desire to protect their IP from China, is their desire to have a global U.S. headquarters, and also to be part of our supply chain. But you don't avoid tariffs in that scenario because semiconductors have aluminum. Semiconductors have all these parts that you have to get from somewhere else. And we've talked about how there's a 25% on steel and aluminum. Well, we can't make all that here because we don't have the refineries. We don't have the smelters. We stopped building those decades ago. So even if President Trump, and I think this is to his credit, wants to build them again, wants more refineries, wants us to get better at aluminum and steel, I think that's great. That's years and years out. Even with regulatory reform, we're not going to see that. So the cost of those ships are going to be more expensive to make here. And then we, again, the consumer, are going to pay for it. When we buy our computers, they'll be more expensive because the chips that went into them, our phones, all of that. It just increases the cost.
And President Trump's not a fan of the Chips and Science Act that helped create, well, at least it helped bring TSMC here. I have to say this because this is something I've argued with my friends with many times, and that is Donald Trump is not a fiscal conservative. I think that becomes really apparent now and that's not a knock on the guy. I'm just saying to suggest he's a fiscal conservative is kind of flies in the face of the facts. he is essentially putting one of the largest tax increases, because this money goes to the government. It doesn't go to it's not passed on to consumers. It goes into the government coffers. These tariffs, and this is I think this is a big sign of that. Do you agree?
I don't know what those labels mean anymore in this world we're living in. I can't tell you what conservative is or isn't, but I think you're right. I think President Trump is definitely more populist in his fiscal policies. And I think we've seen this before. I mean, this is why I always tell people, when they say, why are you so opposed to tariffs because these trade deficits, et cetera? I'm like, because I read books. I understand history. In his speech yesterday, he mentioned the year 1913 a lot, as if there was this great moment where we were doing really good with tariffs, but we moved away from it. Well, why not? Why don't we look at 1930? Because if tariffs were so great, why didn't they work so well for us, in the throes of the Great Depression? Instead, they made it worse, cost people elections. That's what FDR ran on, was reducing these tariffs, 2 years later. So, again, I think historically we know what tariffs do. I think that President Trump is outside any kind of normal label of kind of a fiscal philosophy. Now, this fight between protectionism and, industrial policy, we'll call it,
free
which
trade.
is free trade, and then the Chips and Science Act, which, by the way, his administration wrote. That came out of his Commerce and his State Department. It was signed by President Biden,
and
but
some could argue that that's crony capitalism too.
That's industrial policy. You're right. You could argue that's picking winners and losers, but this fight has been with us since the start of our country. I mean, Alexander Hamilton versus the anti-federalists who would say they were big on protectionism. Alexander Hamilton would say you need to incentivize manufacturing to exist in America, otherwise we'll be vassals of the foreign country. So this is nothing new, but it's interesting to see President Trump's position on this. And I think economists are probably scratching their heads because, to see trade deficits is the rationale for some of those tariffs country by country on that PDF we're all studying, still studying right now, because scratching my head at why Israel is higher than Iran, and Israel has cut their tariffs. But again, I think they're basing it on deficits, which again, deficits because we like cheap goods. We buy a lot of things from other people. So I don't think that's the best rationale. But it's almost as if this administration wants to weaken the U.S. dollar intentionally because they believe that will help spur manufacturing here. Now, again, that's not a conservative position at all. We like a strong dollar. We like to be able to buy goods here, give Americans choice. But again, we'll have to see how this all works out. He's doing a lot of really good things. What he's doing with EPA, what he's doing with permitting reform, what he's doing with energy production, those are all wins for the economy overall. He seemed very obsessed with tariffs and wanting this to be a success. And I think we're going to see this thing where as a country or the EU says, okay, fine, we're going to cut our tariffs on America. And then they'll claim victory after victory after victory. But that's all Pyrrhic to me because you need to see the real results. Did we collect revenue? Because if you go back to term one again, just look at history. We did, President Trump did put tariffs on China. We've been in a trade war with China this whole time. Yeah. Let's go to soybeans. How did that work out? So, we had a retaliatory issue. China wasn't buying soybeans from us anymore. They were buying from Brazil. The little bit of revenue, I say little bit, but the billions we collected off the tariffs from China more or less had to go back to subsidize the farmers who lost, what was being bought. Right. So again, nobody won in that trade war right there. So again, this is very interesting to see what's happening right now.
Since you served in a Republican administration, Doug Ducey's administration, let's talk purely political for just a second. How does this affect the Republican brand? How does this, in the long term, affect Donald Trump's legacy? And I know some people are already wanting to slap his face on the $100 bill. But long term, how does this affect his legacy? And how does it affect first off, the 2026 Arizona statewide elections and then the 2028 presidential election?
Well, if you were to poll, the general public, and they do, one thing that's always been true, they tend to trust Republicans more than Democrats to handle the economy.
Absolutely.
And I think we all believe President Trump is better at handling the economy. We all, in terms of Republicans, believe that President Trump is better at handling the economy than, what they believe Vice President Harris would have done. Now, if this tariff gamble, I'll call it, doesn't pay off, and if we're 2 years in and the results aren't there yet, I think it hurts Republicans because one thing that we know about President Trump is he expects a lot of people to just fall in line with the policies. And you're seeing that right now. And I'll say I've seen people I respect kind of doing mental gymnastics to say tariffs are good. You're having these conversations with your friends. I'm having with my friends. I was like, but Danny, there's, a 200% tariff. How is that fair? I'm like, well, it's a trade deficit. And, I love George Will it's very folksy, but it's very true that we have a trade deficit with our barbers, right? I pay my barber, money to cut my hair, for a service every 2 weeks. He leaves with money. I leave with, a service. And we were both happy. He doesn't give me anything back other than.
I've been able to figure out how to get him to cut only the gray hairs, by the way. But,
so if we're winning in a deficit, it's a good thing. But right now, I do worry about that impact. I also don't love that we can't disagree. And that's why I say I can tell you all the good things he's doing on the EPA. I can tell you the great things he's doing on permitting reform, on energy production, and I'm very excited about that. He and Administrator Zeldin, who was just here, we hosted him 2 weeks ago. Right. They are saving Arizona's economy, existentially by just using logic and reason that you can protect the economy and public health. That's very exciting. So you can say that, but then you can also say, but hey, we've always believed this about tariffs, that they're bad, that tariffs don't work out, that they hurt America overall. So to see that shift, that's fine if he wants to try it. I'm going to continue to be consistent with what I believe. And I'll be the first one to say, this overall plan of EPA energy production, tax cuts, and tariffs has worked out somehow, because it's unprecedented. That's one thing. You're seeing a shift too that everyone's going to say, anyone who's telling you, the chamber tells you the tariffs are bad, they don't know how it'll end. I agree with that. I don't know how this ends. But that's also scary. I mean, that's very scary.
Either.
Jim, I'll tell you, I know companies who are pulling back decisions right now, waiting to see. And it's not the tariff as much as the uncertainty around, well, there's a tariff today. Is there a tariff 25 days from now? Will these go down? I mean, businesses like reliability. They like stability. They want to plan long term. And there's so many millions of jobs tied to imports and exports. And that all revolves around what happens with these tariffs right now. So, and I believe President Trump cares about the American worker. I believe he cares about the economy. Mm-hmm. I think he's someone who operates where some of his past work, like the CHIPS and Science Act and the USMCA, are relative. So he can make a shift in policy and be pretty nimble. So I'm encouraged by that. I'm encouraged by these exemptions we're seeing. But right now I'm disappointed that more people can't stand up and say we've always known this about tariffs. So kudos to Senator Paul, who is a huge President Trump fan on almost everything except tariffs.
Yeah. It's interesting because I kind of saw Donald Trump, especially in his first term, in a lot of the ways that I saw Reagan. So my dad, my stepdad, the guy who raised me, was a machinist, and he worked at a coal mine in northern Arizona. And he was vice president of his local union. And I wouldn't say he was a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat by any means, but he was certainly not a Republican. But Ronald Reagan won him over. And it felt like that's kind of what Trump was doing, but it's different.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
No, it is different, but that's such a great example, and thanks for sharing that, because I obviously I love President Reagan, and I love the fact that he went from being a union rep, to being one of the most union busting presidents in history, and I think that says more about the politics of labor unions than it does about the American worker. I think Ronald Reagan proved you can be for the worker without having to be for what unions are doing. Now, we have mixed relationships with unions. We get along great with the trades. We get along great with public safety when we can. Public safety almost always, trades when we can. But the politics that they do, they step outside their lane all the time. But I love the employees. I love the workers. And I believe our policies help workers more than the other side most of the time. And that's why I thought Donald Trump was so great. He had broadened our tent again, our tent being the Republican Party's tent. He was bringing blue-collar workers back. He was making, the forgotten man. He was getting back to, telling people, I believe in your American dream. I want you to succeed. He does do a really good job on telling people not to give up. That's like a recurrent theme. Again, I think we can say something nice about everyone, so let's say something nice about it. He always tells people, never give up. I hear it all the time in all of his speeches, and that's very encouraging. He says, most of the people I know, if they had just waited, if they just held on, it would have been good. So I think he's going to be saying a lot of that right now when we're looking at our 401ks. Just hold on. This will get better. And even if he has to change policy, I think he will, because I do believe he's done a good job of bringing those people back into politics, making them care, making them vote. And that engagement is good for us. It's good for politics. It's good for the economy. But yeah, I think they're going to be very confused by some of this right now. Because again, Ronald Reagan, who you just mentioned, President Reagan, gave great speeches on tariffs all the time. It's very easy for a president to come in and say, we are going to do a tariff because it's for the American worker. It sounds very populist. Everyone can be excited about it. And maybe for a short term, you get that political benefit. But when they lose their jobs, when their 401ks go down, when we lose millions of jobs in a trade war, no one's happy. And so that long-term benefit is bad. Now, we'll see if President Trump's master plan will work here or not. And I always want the U.S. economy to succeed. I would rather be wrong about what I know about tariffs throughout history and have more people at work making more money and the U.S. thriving than being able to say, I told you so, told you this was what's going to happen. I'd rather be like, good for him. He figured out a way to make this all work. Yeah.
Maybe it was just the wrong combo before, and maybe it's going to take that 50% tariff on Saint-Pierre, the French territory near Newfoundland, right next to the Maritimes. I don't know.
And, Arizona does have a special relationship with both Mexico and Canada.
Yeah.
And I think now more than ever, we have to do our part as a state to just keep increasing that and spending time building those relationships up. We want Canadian investment here in Arizona. We love our Canadian snowbirds who come in town. They spend a lot of money here.
Yeah.
They're a great partner for us. Mexico, fantastic partner for us. I mean, all the places where tariffs are going right now. Israel, great partner for Arizona. It's a great trading partner as well. Taiwan, huge trading partner for us. They
were among the largest tariffs, by the way.
I know, and I wish I could understand that reasoning. And again, it looks very formulaically based on what you would call a trade deficit. And I don't want to sound like an economics professor because I'm not, but I can remember, being at Pepperdine and, Ben Stein, famous for his game show, was always the visiting lecturer for macroeconomics, talking about things like inflation and trade deficits. And that's how I remember. That's how I remember learning about this stuff. And I didn't think I'd be talking about it years later because I thought we'd settled this. I thought we settled what this policy does. And even, it used to be Democrats were more for it. Now we've all kind of said, hey, the U.S. benefits from the good trade deals, and now we're entering a new era, and it's unprecedented.
All right. Well, we'll stay tuned and see what happens. Right.
Agreed.
Thanks a lot, Danny Seiden, the president CEO of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Appreciate your time and your thoughts on all this.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me on. Don't look at your 401ks for a week or so. We'll see if it gets better.
But please watch next week's AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharpe, and we'll see you then.
Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast with Jim Sharpe. Click the box to watch more from KTAR News and tap the button in the middle to subscribe.